Hey YouTube, this is The Art of Prepping. I saw an article today that caught my attention. It's not surprising at all, but I don't see it getting a lot of attention in the way that it should. And I don't really see any commentaries that are worthwhile on the topic, so I want to read the article and then provide a commentary. The commentary might be quite extensive and long, so just be aware of that. Of course, at any point in time that you want to exit the video, you're more than welcome to do that. So the article is over here at thehill.com. Once again, thehill.com, and it's /policy/healthcare/mental health. So the time or the date stamp here is going to be October 17th, 2019. They posted the article at 2:31 p.m. Eastern Daylight Time. And so the title is Suicide Rates for Children. Young People Jumped Between 2007 to 2017, CDC. And once again, if you don't know what the CDC is, it's the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention based out of Atlanta, Georgia. Now, this article was written by Justin Coleman. And so let's go ahead and get into this article. The suicide rate among those between ages 10 to 24 jumped between 2007 and 2017, according to a report released by the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention on Thursday. The 56% jump in that decade contrasted with a more stable suicide rate among the age group previously. In 2007, there were 6.8 suicides per 100,000 people among ages 10 to 24, while in 2017, there were 10.6 suicides, according to the CDC. Suicide is the second leading cause of death among people in that age range, behind accidents, according to the Washington Post. The suicide rate was higher than the homicide rate in that age group starting in 2011. When broken down by age groups, the suicide rate for those aged 10 to 14 almost tripled between 2007 and 2017. For teenagers 15 to 19, the rate surged 76% in that decade. For 20 to 24-year-olds, the rate of suicides has been increasing from 2000 to 2017 at a rate of 36%. The Post noted researchers do not know the reason for the spike in the suicide rate among teens and young people, though they saw it as cause for alarm. Just looking at these numbers, it's hard not to find them completely disturbing. It should be a call to action. Lisa Horwitz, a pediatric psychologist at the National Institute of Mental Health, told the Post. My eyes are going cross-eyed. I'm trying to read this small screen as I do the voiceover, so I apologize. Okay, so I'm going to now shift gears and go to my notes. I have written an outline here. It's titled Youth Suicide. It's not a very fun topic here, obviously, but something that we need to talk about as society continues to, so-called progress, if you want to call this progression. We have a lot more mental health issues than ever before. And this is a problem with modern society across the board. We see this in other countries as well, not just here in the U.S. Lots and lots of mental health disorders, problems of all sorts. And so why is this? The article doesn't even, highlight one issue. They're afraid to even touch on the subject. The subject is large. It's a vast, vast range of possibilities, and it just depends on the individual too. There's not like just one thing that's causing all these new suicides. This is not true at all. But I'm sure there's probably some things more so than others. I think we could probably agree with that. Now, I just have a list of things that I want to run through. I'm not going to run through them very fast. At the time of making this video, it's quite late at night, and so I'm a little tired, but I'm going to just kind of go through them at the pace that I feel comfortable and just kind of talk freely and kind of just, informally about this topic. Now, once again, I used to be a counselor, and I've worked in a number of various environments. I worked in a hospital, inpatient hospital care, outpatient, residential, you name it. And let me tell you, there's a lot of different types of suffering out there. Lots of different types of suffering that could lead to suicide. And to see numbers like this, that's becoming that much more common for youth suicide, it's really something that should be considered a larger national issue. But you just don't hear a lot about this at all. It's not a popular issue. A lot of people are embarrassed to talk about it, especially if it's happened to someone in their family. So let's just get into some of the reasons that it's possible that could be a cause or part of the problem. I mean, first and foremost, the individual might have some type of organic damage to begin with, brain trauma. I mean, there's a lot of that going on, especially with sports these days. Kids are under a lot of pressure to perform, and they push, and they get injured. They don't even know they're injured. And getting hit on the head a number of times, especially those who play football and other contact sports, it's surprising how that those types of injuries can lead toward changes in the brain. So we have to look at that. But to me, there's other issues that are really a lot more obvious, like in our face obvious. And I'll just kind of point out first that the breakdown of society, it's right there in front of us. Broken homes everywhere. So many families that don't have a father. Sometimes it's the opposite, but almost in every case that I've seen, it's typically there's no father. Just broken homes, single parent homes. Lots of stress on that single parent. Sometimes there's only one parent involved with the child. Sometimes the child has both parents, but they're kind of like broken up in the sense that, they might only see the father just a few times a month, or they're bounced from one home to the other. There's a lot of craziness like that goes on. It's considered to be a lot more normal than it used to be, but it still doesn't mean it's good for the kid. So you got a lot of broken homes, man. And, you can't tell me that when the children see and witness their parents or their parent suffer every day, that doesn't play havoc, in their developmental growth. I'm sure it does. So that's first and foremost. We could get, really into that, the whole broken home thing. We could do like a whole series on that. But let's move to the next topic here, and that's going to be drug side effects. And I'm not talking about just illegal drugs, but I'm sure that's a component to this, or at least some of this. But we have a lot of things that are prescribed to our youth that we have no earthly idea of what the side effects really are long term. And even for the most part, even, medium term and some of the side effects we're just learning about short term stuff. It's just like, really? So you have various types of so-called medication for ADD or ADHD, various anxiety or social anxiety meds, antidepressant meds, and a lot of these have various side effects, some of which are suicide, or at least suicidal ideation. And I'm telling you, I've seen this firsthand, working in the mental health field. Lots of people have really bad reactions to these psychotropic meds and other types of meds that try to reconfigure, rewire your brain. It's changing the neurochemistry of the brain. You can't tell me that it's all going to be good. There's going to be some side effects. So drug side effects, either be it legal or illegal, it's playing a part on this. There's no doubt about it. Just flat out depression, It's not that uncommon for young people to get depressed from time to time, and sometimes they have a hard time getting out of it. And it could just be, the pressures of life. Some people just have a harder time than others with life. And so, the hardest part about this is when you watch people, hit rock bottom and you try to help them and they slowly are starting to get out of that rut. But that's really the most dangerous point, is when someone's coming out of depression or coming out of the low, at least. Because now they have energy to act upon some of their impulses. See, when you actually hit rock bottom, you don't even have the energy or desire to do anything. And that includes like hurting yourself or killing yourself. But you start to have some of that energy when you start to come out of the depression, or when some of this fog starts to lift. And so I think a lot of people, just go, oh, you're taking your medicine for depression and you seem like you're getting better. It doesn't mean that they really are better. A lot of these meds for depression, and I saw this firsthand as well, they just mask symptoms. And it's very dangerous process. The next thing I want to say is, kind of already mentioned this, but societal pressures, societal, stress, it's really something else, just trying to keep up with just anything anymore, just try to keep up with the news. And what you can do is every 5 to 10 minutes, you can refresh your page on your computer or your phone, and you're going to get all kinds of new stories. And that's just one news broadcast or one news source. Can you imagine trying to keep up with 4 or 5 news companies and all these different stories popping up? I mean, you can't even keep up with the news anymore because there's so much of it, much less anything else. You have social media, you have so many other pressures that make you feel inadequate. And there's so much pressure to perform at work or at school, to make a certain amount of money or to buy certain things. All kinds of advertising pressures that are really, to some degree, like unconscious. And we don't even really have the awareness of it, obviously. So that's a real something right there. To really get your hand around that one, it can take a while because it's a layered system. It's a layered system of pressures that we're born into. And so you have to go back to the very earliest days to see what you've been exposed to and what you've been kind of acclimated. What has been your sense of norm? What is normal to you? The next is the dopamine down regulation that I see what a lot of people have. That they just don't feel good. They're tired. They can't focus. And I really do feel like across the board, there's a lot of really bad habits and addictions that's been societally kind of normalized and okayed, but they're not good for us. And I'm not just talking about like doing things like smoking or other kind of legal drugs and things. I'm talking about, once again, getting on your computer and just surfing the web for hours and hours. Once again, social media. And I'll touch base on this one down the road here, but there's just a whole epidemic of people who try to find refuge in something. And it could be pornography. It could be video games. There's a whole world of gaming that's going on right now. And it's almost like there's an escape that people just search for. Everybody wants to escape reality because reality is just so harsh. And if you can find a place to hide out, then why not? But what happens is you become less and less efficient at dealing with the real world the more you're not in it. So you have the brain is messing up with this dopamine. And the dopamine is just critical for our ability to not only just focus and feel alert and alive, but it really is a source, one of several sources to help us have motivation to do something, to better ourselves, to learn new things, right? To go and explore and to have relationships, and what do you see in this world right now? A lot of people don't want to have committed relationships. They want instant gratification. But because of all that, you've cheapened yourself and your experiences. Your life and the way you experience your life is really cheap in the sense that your experience isn't very rich and vibrant as it could be, because your dopamine and other chemicals that work with them really are suppressed. They're down-regulated. So you're not getting the full effect of what life really is. You're just getting this shadow of life. It's really sad. Okay. The next thing I want to say is that there are large amounts of bad information, disinformation, propaganda. If you watch this channel at all, I talk about it from time to time. I have to watch how much I talk about this, not only just because I get in trouble with YouTube and they get all hissy fit when I try to bring up the obvious, but because it's not healthy for me to dwell in the world of negativity and lies and deceit. And so I try to call things out from time to time, but I don't like to dwell in this evil world that we live in, and especially watching too much of the mainstream media will pretty much put anybody into depression. So you got to really regulate some of that, expose yourself just enough to get what you need and leave. If you can, don't even expose yourself to some of this stuff. It's not worth it. But there's a lot of deceit in the world. And I can understand in part young people that are very bright and aware of things, of how much evil is in the world. And I'm not saying that's a big reason of why people are killing themselves, but it could be a reason. Another reason that I've seen clearly contribute to suicide, especially those in grade school, going into high school, it's very sad. It's a very, very sad thing. And it can really traumatize a person for their entire life if they don't get appropriate help. And that is bullying. To be bullied at a young age, even later in life, it's not fun. But when you're young and you're more vulnerable and you've got older, bigger kids doing things to you, either verbally threatening you or physically terrorizing you and torturing you or whatever, it is not good for your development. It scars you and traumatizes you. And so definitely you hear about this from time to time in the news, about bullies and what should we do about them. And what I found out is the bullies are the ones who are really had the bigger problems, even more so sometimes than the person who gets bullied. These bullies are actually crying out for help. They don't know how to really communicate they need help. They just know that they need to, in whatever way possible, elevate their own status. And what I've seen is that a lot of people will tear other people down to build themselves up because it's the cheapest, easiest way to do that. Instead of going the harder way, the harder road of doing things and earning respect to get more respect, you have these bullies that will get the cheap, quick route of making you look like an idiot and shaming you. So in contrast, they look stronger and better when in reality, they're actually weaker than you in many ways. And so it's sad on both sides, because what I've noticed is that a lot of bullies have been bullied themselves, or they have all kinds of problems at home in particular. A lot of physical abuse. They're exposed to a lot of domestic abuse. It's a no-win situation across the board. But going back to the victims of bullies, it can definitely leave scars. And And that could contribute to the consideration of suicide. The next is poor nutrition. I've seen this really across the board as well. Kids just not eating enough real food. Like they just live off of potato chips or donuts and soft drinks. I kid you not. I see a lot of kids trying to get all their nutrition out of just junk food, and it's really not possible. And some families say, hey, we can't just make our kids eat, when they're supposed to eat or eat the foods that we want. They just won't do it. But this is when you have better communication, more open communication, and you explain to the children, and once again, if you're the parent, you're the parent. You need to act like a parent. And a lot of parents think that they have to be friends with their kids. Well, in a perfect world, that would be great, but you're first and foremost a parent. You're trying to keep them safe and secure and healthy. That's the first objective. And, later on, you can be friends with them, but you have to have good boundaries and you have to set limits. And so what I see with the poor nutrition is that parents they don't want to engage in any more power struggle because they're already worn out when they come home from work. They're just trying to get them to eat something and get them to do some of their homework. And that's why I feel like that there's not enough attention really given to the kids. And the parents are so tired anymore that they just try to shove them off. And they tell, well, kids go and watch a TV show or a movie while, your dad and I are going to just take a nap or something. And I've seen this and heard this so many times. Parents are just struggling to be parents. They're just wiped out. I want to now switch over to poor sleep. A lot of kids are just exhausted. School systems starting so early in the morning. It's just so against the natural circadian rhythm of kids, especially going into high school and all throughout high school. High school kids, just naturally stay up later. And, the thing about this is that grade school and high school kids typically need anywhere from 8 to 10 hours of sleep. Some kids even need more. It just depends on the individual. But the reality is 6 to 7 hours is kind of the best that most kids get. And so they're sleep deprived. And that's what I've seen through the studies and talking to kids, face to face. Well, I'll ask them, hey, when do you go to bed? When do you get up? And you know what? It's 6 to 7 hours if they're lucky. Some nights it's 5 hours. And you wonder, you're like, how do you even function? It's amazing the kids even function as they do, because some of them have to get up super early, catch a bus. They're on a bus for a half an hour to an hour. Then they finally get to school. They have a long day of school, maybe even after school programs, and they have to get back on the bus or have to wait for their parent to pick them up after they get off from work. It's a long day. It's a very long day. So they're tired. They're very tired. And when you have expectations as a child to perform academically, and then maybe you have a sport that you do, you have all this pressure, but you're so tired. And who knows the potential of these kids. If they were actually able to get good food, get the nutrition that they really need to recover and to excel and to get some good sleep, who knows what's possible. Chemical exposures. There's a lot of households. When I used to do house visits, I didn't do a lot of this, but when I first started getting into counseling, there was times that I went to people's homes and as part of like their therapy. And let me tell you, you would see not just messy and dirty homes, but you would see various things that are out that shouldn't be out, chemicals. And who knows what these kids are exposed to. And some of them are living in some very old homes that have like lead paint and asbestos, in the tile or in the walls. I mean, exposure can really mess with you and make you do some things that you normally wouldn't do. And so it can make you depressed or not very functional. And, You know, if you can't function for a period of time, a lot of people just give up in living and they kill themselves. Okay, so I want to now talk about pornography and other harmful addictive behaviors and exposures. Yeah, once again, you know, we have like social media. That one can be really bad if you're hooked on that. I mean, I know people who are just social media junkies. They have 4, 5, 6 different social media accounts, and they're just switching from one to the next constantly. Even as they're working, they try to sneak their phone in their place of work, and they're always trying to do that. And they're just hooked. And when I ask them, are you even enjoying yourself? And they say, not really. It's kind of more like a job. So why even do it? Well, because they're addicted to it. And of course, you know, a really big problem, and this is in a lot of places, not just the US, but pornography, man, I didn't expect that when I was a counselor of how many people had addiction to that whole world of darkness. And I just want to tell you that that's something that you really have to monitor anymore with your your kids. Excuse me. If you're, allowing them to have internet access. And if I were you, if I was a parent, I'd have a number of safeguards on the computer to kind of limit their access to sites like this. It's not something that you want to expose your kids. And so the thing about the whole pornography world, this is what I found out when I was counseling various people, is that it messes up what you consider your norms. So the way you see your husband or wife, your ability to perform in intimate ways, your whole mind frame of how you see other people, it's all warped. And this is another example of dopamine, how it messes your dopamine down, regulates it. And your whole world becomes real flat and just kind of boring, and you don't really have a lot of interest, and it can destroy you. And one of the things that I always promoted with clients was to go 90 days. A lot of times people couldn't do that, so you just go as long as you could. But go 90 days and abstain from whatever it is that you're struggling with that's really bad for you, an addiction or whatnot. Of course, you'd want to, if it's a really bad thing, you don't want to do it ever again. But, you have to take things in stages if you're going to be realistic. And so you can kind of reset the body and the mind with a 90-day fast of whatever it is. And that kind of helps the brain kind of go back to its previous state and to allow yourself to feel more normal with dopamine and other different chemicals released in a normal way. And so it's something to consider, or if you know a young person, to help them switch behaviors before it becomes an addiction, whatever they're doing, video games or whatever. Even sports can be addictive. So, you have to kind of watch kids, make sure that they don't go too far with anything. The next thing I want to talk about is gang violence and the stress of not having a home life, so they seek it out elsewhere. And so the gang becomes family. The problem is gangs in general are just known for getting into mischief and doing things that aren't legal and causing problems. I mean, there might be a gang out there that's not a problem, but I just don't know of any. They typically are roving packs of young people that have nothing to do, or they're just bored in general, or they have no home life. There's no one at home. There isn't really like a mother and a father, typically speaking, and so, mom might be working 2 jobs, never home. And so you're like, hey, I'm not going to sit here all day by myself. I'm going to go and join this group and, get into some action. But that action can lead into some bad stuff. And sometimes when you're targeted, either by your own gang, maybe it turns on you, or you're targeted by other gangs, there can be a lot of stress. And you do that for a number of years, it can be quite, anxiety provoking, and it can even move into depression and cause a lot of psychological problems. So as we see here, there's a lot of possible causes for suicide. Another thing I see, even now, even though I'm not into counseling anymore, I still see it all over the place. A lot of lonely people, lots of lonely people. And, when I was growing up, I thought lonely people were only older people, but that's not true at all. There's a lot of young people that are very lonely. They're just starved for attention, mostly they're not getting enough attention from their parents, but just across the board, they're just not getting attention from almost anyone. I used to also teach high school, and just for a very short period of time. And I saw how many people they try to cram into a classroom. I believe in my state, they were allowed to go up to 35 in a classroom, but typically I had 25 to 28 in my classroom. And it was really too many kids for one teacher. And you can't give them, every kid enough attention. There's just no way to really give people the attention that they need to really grow and challenge them. And it's the same thing at home. Once again, the parents are so overwhelmed with life. They just don't have any energy when they get home. They're drained. It's not an excuse, but it's just a reality. So you have a lot of kids that are just lonely. They have no one to talk to. There's no consistency. And so they'll either act out or once again join some kind of gang, or they'll do things to get that attention, and it's not always very positive. And then they get punished for that when all they really wanted in the beginning was just someone to talk to. And you punish them enough, or you put them in jail, and you see the downward spiral. Grief. Grief comes in a lot of different forms. It doesn't always have to be like, someone's passed away. You can grieve various elements of your life, or you can grieve how things used to be. You can grieve a friend that's not around anymore because they moved away, or, there's a lot of things that can happen. And some young people are very sensitive to some of these changes or losses. And before you know it, they can be in a place of depression. And so we have to kind of be mindful and, open and sensitive to how we change things for young people, because it's not that they're not able to change with the change, if you will, to be malleable or adaptive, because they can be. But if you present and you push too much change at one time, it's just a lot harder to deal with, like with anybody else. So, we have to look at the issue of grief. Next would be a lot of kids have no purpose. They have no goals. They have no person to look up to, like no role models. They just have nothing going on in their life. There's a lot of kids that have no sports that they're active with. They have no extracurricular activities, no hobbies. They literally just go to school, do what they're told, do the minimum to get through and to avoid, attention that's not desirable. They just do the minimum. And these are the kind of the walking time bombs, because they're functional, but they're kind of like the walking wounded, if you will. Like there's something wrong, and they may not be really able to verbalize what's wrong. They may just think this is how it is. And I can tell you, growing up, like I knew a few kids like that. They were like, something was just off with the kids. And I come to find out that there's some things that were going on at the home. And basically the kid was just from a very early age, kind of an outcast in their circles. So there, some things can snowball in life, and you would think a lot of things could snowball to the extent of just like a grade school student or a high school student. So many things could culminate in that small amount of time, but it can be. And we also have to remember the pressure a lot of these kids have at school anymore. I mean, just look at technology. You have all this technology to try to master, and all this information, that we didn't have, like back in my day. And then we have all this wireless technology, and there's all kinds of studies that show very clearly that exposure to all this radiation from like Wi-Fi and cell phones and all this stuff really does make a difference in how we feel and how we actually, process information. And so there's been schools that have had to petition cell towers to be moved away because students were coming down with cancer and nosebleeds, having chronic headaches, blurred vision. I mean, there's like a long list of problems. And so you have to be on top of that if you're a parent. If your kid just doesn't feel good a lot, maybe going back to the point earlier made, maybe there's some type of environmental exposure going on. And this can mess you up. Like I said, I mean, it can even kill you depending on how much exposure you're getting or overexposure. It seems like in the last few decades, this is a bigger problem than not, and that is some kind of sexual identity confusion. I don't know if this really went on a lot more in the past, but just wasn't talked about. I saw this a little bit when I was in counseling. I didn't specialize in this part of psychology or the counseling field, but there does seem to be a lot of people, I'll be honest with you, that are just confused. They don't know what's going on. Even though biologically you can look and say, okay, you're a girl or you're a boy, but they don't really care. They're like, I don't know, I really don't feel like a girl or a boy, or I might be somewhere in between, or I don't know. And you're like, how can you just not know? You're you're either one or the other, right? And there is so much talk about, this. It's almost like you wonder how much society has prompted the problem to be a bigger problem than what it really is. All this confusion, and I don't know. It's hard for me to identify with this problem because, I mean, for me, I've always like, okay, I'm a guy, and I know I'm a guy, and I'm okay with being a guy, so there's no problem. But apparently, there's somewhere between 2 to 3% of the population that's very confused, and possibly even another 1 to 2% of the population that kind of is somewhat confused in the sense that they're kind of not for sure, of what gender they want to be and how they want to live their life, or who they're really attracted to and who they're not. Once again, it just seems like how much of that is contributed by society and media, and I don't know. Even political belief systems may have something to do with this. I don't really know about all that. I just know that there are various interesting brain scans that have been done, and it shows like people that are, let's say, gay, for example, they have different formations of brains than straight people. So I thought that was really interesting. So there really are, I believe, some people with certain preferences that they have those preferences because they have organic brain differences than other people. And it's not just a choice, because some people always say that, but some people do just choose, and some people actually have real, brain differences. So I'll just leave it at that. But because of all this confusion, I've definitely have come into various bits of information and talked to other counselors and therapists that have known people that they've been working with and that they ended up killing themselves because of the confusion. So I'm just glad that I didn't have any patients, or clients that had that issue, but or went that far. But it does happen. Sometimes you just can't. You can't save the world. That's something that really counselors and therapists are not there to save the world. They're just really more of a witness to the person suffering to help them find coping mechanisms to get through it, right? But it does sometimes feel like that you could have done more, even though really it's not really in your hands. The person has to live their life and make their choices, and you can't live their life for them. Okay, so I wanted to kind of conclude this video now with the last point here, and it's mainstream media. We've already kind of brought it up a few times, but yeah, they're kind of responsible for a lot of confusion, propaganda, just overall media in general, movies that come out, video games, that causes a lot of confusion, sometimes a lot of anger, a lot of distrust, lots of problems. And I'm not saying that all media is bad or all of it's like lies. No, but there's a good amount of really kind of questionable stuff out there, if not just flat out lies. I mean, there are some of that for sure. And so we live in a world that is just, man, it's messed up to some degree. It's not without hope, but you know what? It's a hard world to just jump into. And if you're a young person right now, man, it's rough. It really is rough. Trying to keep up, excuse me, just trying to keep up with a lot of this. What goes on, just anything in general, like I said, just the news, or just trying to keep up with what news is right and what's wrong, or just trying to keep up with your classmates, and can you imagine though, like all your classmates are on social media. So man, see, we didn't have that when I'm old enough that we didn't have any of that. So when I saw my classmates, they were in school and then we would go home and we would have some rest and some time away from each other. But nowadays, it's like everybody has cell phones. So we didn't have any cell phones. I was too young for any cell phones in high school. So you have kids that are like keeping up with each other 24/7. And you've got to, think that that's probably pretty intense. That's a lot more intense just socially than it, especially if you have socially awkward tendencies or if you're not, in the in-group. And can you imagine just trying to navigate that world? Apparently some kids do it and they do it okay, but there's just a lot of social pressures that never existed or didn't exist, when I was young. And I can only imagine what the future holds, And so what's so sad though, I feel like, is that so much of this is just preventable. There's so much preventable stuff. And I feel like that technology for the most part is actually kind of more destructive than helpful. Not always, but man, it sure is destructive and it sure has a lot of negative connotations these days. I mean, there are so many times that even my own self wants to just get rid of my cell phone. There's so much of me that says this isn't healthy to be on the phone this much. So I try to limit my time these days. But I must say, though, that we're so interconnected through the internet and through other technologies that it's hard not to want to be on these devices because we get that hit of dopamine. But we do it so much that then we start to down-regulate once again and we start to feel crappy. And so it's like trying to strike a balance in this fast-paced world is a really, really big challenge. And so this video is about youth suicide, and I hope I highlighted a few things to think about for you. And for those people that, commented in the article that I read, in that article, they didn't even bring up one possibility of what could be the problem. And if any of those people watch this video, I hope it helps you guys look into something. I'm sure you guys probably understand that a lot of what's going on, but, for whatever reason, you didn't comment, in the article. And I think it's good to highlight what's really going on, even if it's not politically correct. And because if you really want to help the kids and the youth of this world, you have to identify the problem. And a lot of people don't even want to talk about the problem. They want to tell you that there's a problem, but they don't really want to tell you why. And that does us no help. So the best you can do is if you're an adult, is to be the best adult you can for the younger people, either a role model or a good parent. And if you're young, look up to people that have things, organized and that they have things figured out, at least somewhat figured out. No adult really has everything figured out. But try to find someone or several people, if you're young, to look up to. Try to be consistent in how you do things. Try to stay off technology. Don't be on it all day long. Don't be on the social media all day. And just be mindful that things affect you. And The world is always changing. So is also your peer group. And just know that if you have someone that's really bothering you in your class right now, it doesn't mean that they're always going to be in your life. It could be that your next year, they move away or they go into a different class. And so sometimes just you have to be patient. And life is not always easy or fun. That is for sure. But there typically is a way to deal with things. And I would say that there's probably always a better way to deal with life than suicide. So if you're watching this and you're someone that's struggling, don't give up. Don't give up. You need support. You have to ask. You have to reach out for help. And sometimes people are not very good at reading other people. So you might have to tell someone just straight up, I need help. I'm not in a good place. And you have to tell them if you feel like that you're going to hurt yourself. That is something that could scare you a lot more than you know, because you're really addressing the issue. And when you start to address the real issue, when you start to ask for help, it's going to become more real to you than you may imagine. But that's the first step to getting all this kind of worked on. And so the thing, though, that I have to say that concerns me the most is when I used to work in inpatient care, and I was working with an adolescent ward that, man, very sad. I never really liked working there at all. It was a really bad experience, in my opinion. These young adolescent kids, basically it's all like you're all locked into the rooms. It's an inpatient ward. Like there is no freedom. Like they can't go outside. They're just locked in, and they're all drugged up pretty heavy. And this is the sad part about modern day medicine. And this is one of the main reasons why I left, because it's not very good. Mainstream medicine sucks bad. The healthcare is really horrible. And I couldn't be a part of it anymore. It's almost like you see mainstream medicine do more harm than help. And when you see so much suffering and you're not able to help them, you don't have the tools to help them, you get to a point that why even try anymore? Because what's really happening is it's starting to break you down too. And a lot of kids are put into these facilities for a number of days or weeks. They're forced into these counseling, groups. That's what we did, basically, just big groups. And sometimes you'll have one-on-one, but most of the time they're put into a big group, and they're medicated pretty heavily. And they get them what they call stabilized. They stabilize the kid. Really? But it's all kind of generic, though. They're not really stabilized. They're just drugged so much that they can't function. They can't really act out. And so what you see is that there's a big cycle that happens. And so I understand why kids don't want to sometimes tell other adults that they really are in a bad place. Because I wouldn't want to go to those places either, to be locked up and drugged. And some of those kids have bad reactions to those drugs. And when I worked for the time that I did in that particular unit with the adolescents, I noticed that the nutrition was so subpar. A lot of these kids were just living off of hot dogs with hot dog buns and chips and Coke. And that was literally their nutritional level. How can you function? How can you even feel normal if you don't even have real food? How can you deal with life if you don't have the raw materials to function correctly? And so they're giving them crap food and all these drugs, and their body's supposed to be like normal. It's such a messed up world that we live in, that those parts of the world I can't participate anymore in because it's wrong. And so I wish the kids the very best. I don't even know what to do sometimes when I think about all this. Like, what's the best way to deal with all this? I can certainly say is to probably get rid of most of the drugs and have a little more personable care. That would be a start. And to give them a safer environment. I saw so many people attacked. I was attacked myself multiple times. Okay. And allow them to get real rest because they feel safe. Give them real food so their body can rebuild. And not just cover up all their symptoms with drugs, but to allow them to work through them. There were so many kids that I worked with that had grief issues, but they couldn't actually express their grief. They couldn't go through any of the stages of grief because they were drugged up so much. Now you tell me if that's supposed to be therapeutic. And this is the world we live in. It's a twisted world. It's a difficult world for young people. So I can understand why more kids and young people want to escape and just leave this world. But my desire is to help these kids in some way, or even in this little video, just to make it a little more aware that it's more difficult now than ever to be a kid. So when you see a kid on a sidewalk, I tell you, at least for me, I have a little more compassion, and sympathy for the kid. I really do. Because these kids have a rough road ahead. In some ways, they have a lot more opportunity than any other person in history. I get that. But with those opportunities comes a burden. And so it is what it is. So thank you for listening to this video. Thank you very much. I'm really tired now. It's really, really late, so I'm going to go to bed. But thank you for checking out this video and for supporting the channel. A number of my recent videos have been demonetized. It's not surprising because I talk about issues that are real. And, at some point down the road, and I know I bring this up every once in a while, but I don't know how much more of this I want to do. It's kind of I'm getting burnt out. And because of how YouTube treats me, and because there really is no monetary incentive, and because I have to deal with a bunch of disrespectful comments from time to time, it's really hard for me to kind of want to commit much more time to this. And there are, as we know, a core group of great people that follow my channel and watch all my video. I really thank you guys so much. If anything, I think you guys are the only thing that's really keeping me going right now. There's a lot of other things I want to do with my time, but sometimes I have a few minutes or an hour here or there, and it's just kind of fun to do a video or just to put one together or something and just see what happens. But yeah, I don't know. I don't know what the future holds. It's kind of exciting though, If we knew, then it kind of wouldn't be a mystery, and I'm always up for a good mystery. So you guys have a great night, or maybe it's in the morning, who knows? But at this moment, it's nighttime, so I'm going to get some sleep. You guys take care. Catch you later.